down your pen and your paper because you're not a writer. It's Tom Galligan. I can always push his buttons when I would talk to him and get him fired off. And he is unlike those politicians who are guarded and reserved and practice everything. You could get Tommy a little excited and he just rattle off about 20 things you should never say to a guy with a pen in publishing rights. And I remember one time that I had made so much fun of Tom. I had made him, and I'll talk about the Christmas parade in a minute, but I'd made him one of the butt of the jokes of a Christmas parade column float. And somebody at the courthouse said they brought the paper in on Monday, ran up to Tom's office, because I had really had fun with him, slammed the paper down and said, "Did you see what Lindon Dodd said about you in the paper this weekend?" Tom looked at it and he just laughed. He said, "That's just Lindon." Now, there are other times when I wrote about Tom on a serious basis he didn't like, and the publisher would call me. In fact, the very first time I wrote about Tom, you all might remember, this was back a long time ago, we were going to lose federal funding and grant ability because we didn't put curb cuts in for the handicapped. It was something you had to do in a city, or at least make a conscious attempt to do, to get federal funding and grants. So I wrote a little column that, even if you don't want to do it, you got to do it. It's required. First of all, it's the right thing to do for handicapped. I tried to hit every angle I could. And this is when I worked in the corporate world. I'm sitting at my desk one day. I get a call from Tom Lindley. And he said, "The mayor just called me." I said, "Well, what do he want?" He said, "As soon as I picked up the phone, the first words out of his mouth is, 'Who in the hell is Lindon Dodd?'" So, people still down at the courthouse refer to me as Lincoln. I know Judge Jerry Jacoby calls me Lincoln all the time. He never calls me Lindon. But that's just the way Tommy was. And I've had other times where the publisher would call me and said, "Tommy was in here ranting and raving. He said if he catches you on the street, you're going down." Then I'd run into Tom at an event, something like this. I'd walk over to him. He'd give me 3 or 4 minutes of grief, and then 5 minutes later, if you know Tommy Galligan, he's gone on to the next thing. But to write about the community, my favorite pieces are really just talking to the people of the community. And I mean the people that, I did a piece one time on a group at ACL where my wife works. There was a young lady who came down with some form of cancer that was going to be terminal. She wasn't from here, didn't have any family here, and her family would come in occasionally, but she was a younger girl and they couldn't just come in and stay with her. And there was a young lady that worked there that went around and organized everybody in the company, and then literally they had just scores of volunteers. And as she got worse and worse, somebody would sign up to cut the grass. Somebody would take dinner to her one night. It just went on like this, and this girl went through this for like a 5 or 6 month period before she passed away. And every meal, every chore, everything that had to be done was done by the workers there at ACL. When you get a hold of people and stories like this, they write themselves. All I got to do is stay out of the way of a good story and, go subject and a verb. So a lot of my favorite columns are things that people come to me with and tell me these kind of stories, which I always invite when I talk to people. Send me an email. If you know somebody interesting, somebody that needs a hand, somebody that needs any kind of story, I'll be glad to come and cover a good story. Otherwise, I got to sit on Thursday afternoon and get a 9 o'clock column in and make something up. So I always appreciate any of those kind of suggestions or responses. I know my wife, after I've been writing about a year, we were watching a Seinfeld episode. If any of you ever watched Seinfeld, Elaine used to write the little captions and catalogs. And one of the episodes had to do with her having catalog writer's block. She couldn't come up with anything to describe anything. She just totally had a block. My wife's sitting on the couch. I'm sitting here enjoying a nice show. She said, "That's going to be you one day." And I think any man here will tell you that nobody in the world can take your self-confidence away like your wife. She had me so paranoid after that night. For 3 or 4 years, I would actually write 1 or 2 like generic columns, and I'd have them saved. I call them, they were in the can. If I ever had a week where I had a dry week, you just pull one of these things out. But that quit a long time ago. There's a lot of nights I'll just come home from work. I've had a long day, tired, sit down, play a game on the computer with my son. I looked at my wife, it'll be at 7:30, 8 o'clock. And she said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to write a column. She said, what are you going to write about? I said, I don't know. And that's something that just comes from doing it. You'll sit down, and it used to be that thought of that would terrify me, but after you've been doing something every week for 19 years, and usually those are at almost to the point, whenever I do that, those are the columns that get me in trouble. That's when I pick on a political issue and I'm honest to the core, or anything in the news. That's kind of when you lose any inhibitions or any reservations. You just let it all hang out. And which brings me to my favorite column of the year that people talk about a lot. I do something called the annual Jeffersonville Christmas Parade. And those of you who have never read that piece, what I do on that is I keep track of all the political scandals, stories, anything to do with politics in our community. And I call it a parade. It's just kind of a concept, kind of a humor piece, where every year is the same setup. They don't give me a copy of the list of the parade floats. I always have a co-host, and it's been Mayor Mike Moore. Sometimes it's a national person. One time Sarah Palin, when she was so hot, she was my co-host. And we try to describe floats as they come by. And all the floats will be satirizing or making fun of a politician, a political news story, a scandal, what have you. I always kind of find them humorous. A lot of people find them humorous. Over the years, that has probably gotten me in more trouble than anything I've ever done. 2 years ago, a very prominent family, who I won't mention their name because we're all made up now, but pulled a week's worth of advertising at Christmas out of the newspaper because of my Christmas parade. And when you're a freelance writer at a struggling newspaper and you lose a week's worth of advertising, I kind of figured my career was going to be over. And I want to always give credit to Bill Polium and Shay down at the paper, the editor and publisher, because they stood up for me, and they stood up for the freedom to say what you got to say and what you're supposed to be able to do in a newspaper and not be subject to advertising pressure. I got a call from a very prominent member of the family home one night. We talked it out, and I said, well, I'll say something next week, try to smooth it over. And then 2 days later, they go down and they pull advertising. I just thought, for that to happen in a small town, come after me, attack me, don't go down to the newspaper because of something like that. And don't put pressure on people that your money is going to determine what's going to be in the newspaper. Probably was the roughest week I've had as a writer. I mean, just flat out, it was a very, very stressful week. And then the following year after that, I was very careful, and hopefully I crafted before I sent the parade in and tried not to cause that big of a stir, but you're either going to do it or you're not. If you have to think too long, you're going to be in trouble. As I'm going to get toward the end of this presentation, I wanted to do one thing. I'm going to grab a copy of a book back here. I'm going to read a couple of essays that run a book I wrote. And before I do this, I want to just set up, I talked to Jimmy about, I've done this before at service organizations. I brought some books. I don't want any money for the books, but what I've done in the past, if you want to buy a copy of this book, I ask for a $5 donation, and the $5 donation will go to Gil or Bill or whoever wants to collect it. And all the money you want to pay, I want it to go right back to your organization for, I know you all need money, and for whatever purposes you have. I'll be happy to sign one later or anything like that, but we will do that after the end of the meeting. One of my favorite things to write about is family, especially husband and wife kind of things, kid things. So I'm going to read a couple of quick essays out of here. Let me get a quick drink here. I get a little dry. This one is captioned, when the man came over, there I was, left holding the duck. You want to know something? A man can sometimes get into a plain moral dilemma and really never even see it coming till it jumps up there and right smack dab in the middle of it. I had such an encounter while on a visit to Holiday World Amusement Park, while they were on a family outing with which we had also taken my son's friend CJ. This was probably when my son was about 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. It had been a great day full of fun and family fellowship, We were about to depart from the park when I suggested that the boys go over to the duck pond. It only cost $1, and the duck pond's always been one of Cameron's favorite games. On this particular day, the staff appeared to be operating a little short-handed. The young man who was in charge of the duck pond was also running 2 other booths, which necessitated a short wait on our part. I happened to glance over at my wife, who was handling the ducks as they floated by on the pond. She would pluck one out of the water, place it back into the flow. This routine was followed several times, and I finally figured out just what she was doing. Most of the ducks had a number 1 painted on their underside. She was attempting to find a duck with a larger number, which in turn would get a better prize. My wife was engaging in duck fixing right before my eyes. I had to make one of those moralistic choices in life. Would I do the right thing? She was also telling my son and his little friend which ducks to pick when the young man returned, and I was aghast. What was she thinking? I immediately took charge of the situation, picked up both ducks and placed them on the metal table. I told her we don't want to take a chance on them picking the wrong ones when he gets back. I was now officially an accomplice to the crime. I allowed myself to be led down that wrong path into duck fixing and had even involved my son and his innocent friend. I thought, what am I doing? I'm risking a criminal act trying to outsmart a carny for a 50-cent better piece of carnival crap. There was no turning back now. I was committed to the heinous act of social rebellion against the man. It felt good, kind of exciting. I hadn't felt it quite this way since the time I stole a 2-cent piece of gum from a corner grocery store and spent half the afternoon trying to get it back on the shelf without getting caught. As a young man inspected our ducks, I could sense suspicion written all over his face. It was obvious that he probably hadn't seen a random draw 6 and 4 combination during his entire Midway career. I stood there breathless for a moment, wondering if he was going to call us on the caper. I didn't even know if duck fixing was a misdemeanor or a felony. I did know one thing, however. I had not initiated the crime, but would cop a plea that I was enticed into a life of crime by my wife. Accomplices always seem to get less punishment, and I was willing to turn state's evidence against her for a lighter sentence. I did have to consider the effects such an act might have when it came to conjugal visits. The young man looked me right in the eye and repeated the picks. A 6 and a 4, huh? He had that judgmental look on his face, and I knew my whole life of clean living probably rested on a decision of a young man not old enough yet to drive it without an adult in his car. He hesitated for a brief second, and then took 2 prizes from the 4 and 6 prize boxes, respectively, and allowed the boys to make their prize selection. Ah, but he knew. What's more important is that I knew that he knew that I knew. Some things in life you just know. I guess some of us are just not meant to live a life on the lam. I felt a little bad all the way home. I knew I'd benefited from some ill-gotten gains that afternoon, and I knew it was wrong. I had been unjustly enriched to the tune of a couple of bucks in prizes, and to think I'd only spent about $100 for the afternoon. And one other one here, if I can find it. I did have it marked. Where did I have it? I've actually got Gil going to come up and read the last one, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay. This one is, those of you married out here, especially you men, know you can't lie to your wife. You can try, but you can't get away with it. And I've always thought I was pretty good at poker face, but this one's entitled, Okay, It Might Possibly Could Have Conceivably Been Me. Lying is an art form at which I'm not very adept. I've been married to my wife for almost 14 years, and in all that time, I've probably only lied to her on 2 or 3 occasions, and those were just little white lies. I feel compelled to draw a distinction at this time between 1, lying, and 2, withholding information. Any attorney in his 3-piece Armani suit can explain the difference in a court of law. For me to even include withholding pertinent information, my total would only come to 5 or 6 times at most. I learned something very early on in this relationship. Not only am I not very good at lying, but my wife is very good at detecting a lie. My palms will start sweating, I have trouble with eye contact, and a childhood asthmatic condition returns to haunt me during factual misrepresentations. My wife has also noticed a pattern of involuntary muscle control involving my feet. Armed with this knowledge about myself, my male friends often cannot believe the truths that I have openly confessed to my wife. The following is an example of the last time I attempted to lie to my wife. There's no rational explanation as to why I even tried it in the situation. Seemed like it'd be fun at the time, however, I quickly realized I was in over my head and was no match for my worthy opponent. In fact, this dramatization is only offered as a training scenario for young, inexperienced, and newlywed husbands. I must warn each of you not to try this at home, as I'm a seasoned husband. I was just sitting around the house, minding my own business one afternoon when Kim strolled into the room. "Did you break my turtle?" She was holding in her hand a small ceramic turtle, which for some reason no man would ever understand, sat upon the back of the toilet in my bathroom. It's the bathroom that's so small that when seated and shifting to any position, one's likely to knock off any loose decor, which is why it's in my bathroom. I must interject here for the sake of the reader that I did in fact accidentally knock the turtle off of the lid, and it did fall to the ground and was chipped. I don't think so. An absolute denial would have been best here. It's at this point that we both knew that I had in fact broken the ceramic turtle. "What do you mean you don't know? Did you break it or not?" Okay, so at this point, I was caught. The important thing was not to panic. I had two choices: be smart and admit it, accepting my punishment, or, well, I might have. No apparent reason for this response, I panicked. Now I was becoming a pathological serial liar. "Why did you lie to me?" Suddenly, a seemingly simple act had become rather complicated in its scope within just a few seconds. It's at this point that I realized I was in over my head. Now the real games were to begin. "Well, I remember it falling off while I was in there, but I didn't know for sure it was broken." Another bald-faced lie, but so I thought at the time, a rather good recovery. "Lindon Dodd," she exclaimed while simultaneously holding up 3 distinct separate ceramic turtle pieces. "How could you have picked up all 3 pieces, assembled them together on the back of the toilet, and have not noticed it was broken?" You have to admit she had a valid point on that one. "I don't know, for goodness sake, it's just a ceramic turtle." It's always best to trivialize any of your obvious transgressions. "I just don't understand why you'd lie about it." Time to make a serious strategic move here. Should I have decided to continue this argument, there was a serious possibility of escalation. It was no longer about a cheap yard sale ceramic turtle purchase. Your integrity and her feelings were now on the line. Should one feel the need to continue the discussion, one must be sure there are no skeletons in the closet. Emotional baggage could surface at any time. Any old office flirtations, ex-wives, all-night bachelor parties, or that high school choir concert that you missed are subject to be tabled at any time. Even if these things occurred in the late 70s, they're fair game in her arsenal. "Ha, ha, ha," I feigned laughter as I walked away. I had chosen surrender. Sometimes walking away with your tail tucked firmly between the legs is the best decision. Your only thought at this point should be, is it early enough in the day that I haven't blown my chance for sex tonight? Note, if it's already dark outside, the answer is going to be no. The discussion was not over at this point. She did issue some parting shots in my direction as I hastened my escape into another room. Luckily, we had no emotional baggage to surface, so I just absorbed her volleys. I slithered into the den like the snake that she thought I was for lying. Felt pretty good though, with the sweaty palms, racing heartbeat, and increased blood flow. To paraphrase a line from the movie Apocalypse Now, I love the smell of testosterone in the morning. I felt young, virile, and in charge again. I had attempted a lie and escape with my marriage intact. I know it may seem like a small moral victory to some, but after all, it had been 10 years since I had mustered up the nerve to even make such an attempt. Gil, you want to come on up here a minute? I've asked Gil to do something for me. One of the things I'd still do, notice tonight, I don't wear jewelry as well. I've got a diamond ring that my dad, he used to wear all the time. And The two toughest columns I ever had to write, one was the week my dad passed away, and the other was a certain Father's Day where I